Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In our study of the subject of stylistics, we have come to a very important juncture where we are looking at the most significant theory that the formalists and the stylisticians have proposed for the study of literary art. In that particular study, the theory of foregrounding holds the vital significance because of the fact that the literary language distinguishes itself from the ordinary language on the basis of foregrounding. Now, to achieve foregrounding, the writers choose either parallelism or deviation. Now, parallelism and deviation are two modes or two streams which may be adopted by any writer of literature who will choose to either stick to the rules following parallelism in writing, or either he would stick to rule breaking and would choose deviation. We studied deviation in detail, that how it is a variation, how it is a rule breaking, and how it is something like that disrupts the conventions, beliefs, and the rules of writing. Now, when we look at deviation as rule breaking, we find on the other hand its counterpart that is available to the writers who can use another device that is referred to as parallelism. The name suggests that it is something similar, equal, parallel. It means that any method or style adopted by the writers which would be repetition, which would be creating a similarity, order and harmony in a text would be the device or the technique of parallelism. Let us look today in detail what we started in the last lecture as our study of parallelism as one of the techniques available at the writer's disposal for foregrounding. We know that apart from deviation, texts use other modes and ways of foregrounding as well, and among them one of the most significant type of foregrounding is found in repetition and rule making. You are familiar with the patterns of songs and poems. In songs and poems, the very quality of repetition makes them memorable. It makes them quite striking to the readers and to the listener's ear as well. You often feel that it is difficult to memorize or even remember the long sentences that you read in prose or in stories. But when you hear a song or a poem, it's not easy to forget. It sticks to your mind without much effort. Why is it so? The most important reason of a song or a lyric or a poem or a jingle that sticks to your mind is that it follows parallelism. That is the repetition of sounds, the balance, harmony and order found within the composition, the rhythm, rhyme and meter of a song, its lyrics, is what makes it memorable. So writers, especially in poetry, make use of parallel structures. We also find parallel structures in jingles of different advertisements, and in the patriotic songs, even in the speeches of the politicians and in the slogans that are the political slogans. Even the nursery rhymes, jokes, and also the tongue twisters make use of parallelism because of the very reason that parallel structures are more easy to remember and they strike to the readers or the listeners more than something that is not so parallel. One of the most obvious one of these ways of deviation is through repetition, which can also occur at language in different levels, and it clearly brings forward for the reader the significance of the style of writing. As in deviation, we observed that use of metaphor or irony or a symbol draws the reader's attention towards the meaning or the semantic value and significance of a word or a phrase or the structure. Whereas in parallelism, the reader or the listener's attention is drawn quickly towards the structure, the form of a poem. that how the form and structure of a literary piece contributes to create a sense of harmony, order, and it is different or deviant from the normal order or way of expression. Like for instance, in one of the poems by Robert Browning, that is Porphyria's Lover, he makes use of repetition, and the line that he composes sounds like this: "No pain felt she, I'm quite sure she felt no pain." Now look at this line by Robert Browning in Porphyria's Lover. The first line states, "No pain felt she," and the second line repeats the same, "I'm quite sure she felt no pain." Now, observing this line, we find the repetition of the word "no pain" and also "she felt." But it is reversed. "No pain felt she" is reversed into "she felt no pain." Now, this type of a trivial repetition or a very simple repetition helps to foreground the notion that the murder caused by the persona of the beloved is assumed to be causing no physical discomfort or pain to the victim. The speaker is expressing that when he killed the woman, his beloved, she felt no pain felt she. As if he is stressing over the fact that the act was harmless. It was not filled with any cruelty, that she passed away without any pain or hurt. But this feeling that the speaker is trying to assert his point that the person whom he killed felt no pain makes us feel that the speaker might be mentally disturbed, and he is also a kind of a person who is distorting the truth, and he might not be giving the accurate picture of the reality. The account that he is presenting is biased, is his own feeling, which is not presenting the murdered woman's feeling or emotions. So, through the device of parallelism, you see how a writer can make use of a feeling that is conveyed as either of stress or even of falsehood. So here in this notion, in the repetition, there is sort of a denial of the reality found in the speaker's voice. We feel like a detective or like a policeman that the person who is reporting to us the incident is lying. He is not revealing the truth. So another frequent stylistic device used for foregrounding is parallelism, and this is how many levels you can see that this device operates at. Either it would operate at the level of creating rhyme, rhythm, balance, harmony in the poem, making it memorable, making it easy to remember for the readers. But apart from that memorability, harmony and rhythm that parallelism creates through words and its repetition or sounds and their repetition, parallelism also operates at another level that is related to the theme and the impact of the poem or the story. That is, it may be used in order to emphasize something. It may be used in order to stress on something, because it is drilling, repetition of an idea or a word. Let us look also side by side along with the literary examples at some examples found in daily life in the form of either proverbs or the slogans or the jingles or rhymes too, because it would help you to understand how parallelism functions, how it works, and what effects does it have on the reader. Apart from that, what are the reasons, what are the specific purposes for which the writers use parallelism, because it is not a merely decorative device to make poetry sound different or sound rhythmic. If you assume that parallelism only functions to make poetry and literature rhythmic and more balanced, it would just be a partial understanding of the device of parallelism. because we have seen in just one example in Robert Browning's line from Porphyria's Lover that how the repetition of a word or the parallelism between the structures laid stress on the emotions, feelings and nature of the speaker. That speaker was hiding a reality, that he appeared to be emotionally disturbed or maybe a little perverted. Observe this proverb, out of sight, out of mind. Now, what sort of parallelism are you able to understand in this line? Out of sight, out of mind. We find a balance in the structure. The first part, out of sight, matches and is equally balanced with the second, that is out of mind. There is repetition on the words out of in both the sections of the statement, whereas the word sight has been replaced in the second part with the word mind. Now look that there is similarity. The first striking feature of parallelism is the similarity between the structures that might be on a phonological level. For example, the sound "a" that is there in the beginning of the word, that is out, and off as well. Now here we find phonological resemblance or phonological similarity or similarity of sound. Then there is also similarity at the level of grammar, structure. Then apart from this similarity, parallelism also functions with the help of contrast. And in that contrast might be certain ironies embedded as well. The words sight and mind are contrasted. Sight refers to the eye and mind refers to thought. Sight refers to appearance. Mind refers to thinking, something that is hidden. But on another level, these both words, sight and mind, which appear opposites, match together because sight is also metaphorically something that is the insight or the mind's eye. So in that way, sight of the eye and sight of the mind both are parallel. Look how tricky it is, how interesting it is, and how meaningful and deep it is. That apparently a structure might be similar or it might include some contrasts, but at the level of meaning, it might reveal ironies as well, it might reveal pun, it might reveal the maybe contradiction too. Now we see that a prepositional phrase is followed by a noun. Moreover, the prepositional phrase is repeated, and therefore there is lexical parallelism, that the words or the lexis are the same. So this foregrounds the opposition between sight and mind that we discussed, that sight is the appearance, what is visible. Mind is the thought, which is hidden. Mind and sight, these notions force us to create a meaningful connection between the two. And then we interpret these two notions as similar as well. The way we see that there is sight, that is eye, and the mind also is showing insight or vision. So what our eyes cannot see is erased from our mind, is what this proverb reveals. If you further explore the same proverb, you will notice a link between sight and mind, and see is not only some physical quality, but it is also the mind's ability or eye. Also, you can note the phonological parallelism between the words out and off, that is resemblance of the a sound, and the two foregrounded words both have one syllable, the same vowel sound, and are very similar in their last consonant, that is t and d. Sight and mind, t and d are both louder, they are clearer, they are not sibilants, or they are not you can say sounds which are not so forceful. So both t and d are forceful and harsh sounds. So on the level of even consonant sound, the writer has created the same force by putting d where in the earlier section t sound existed. So you can notice the similarity of the notion of the sound as well as the notion of meaning, grammar, lexis, and phonology. Mostly parallelism is used when writers want to join together two visibly recognizable structures. A parallel structure usually joins two or more recognizably similar yet not identical structures. Now here the idea that these structures may not be identical, because similarity of identity, that is mere repetition of the same word, sound, is a trivial sort of a metaphor. Apart from that identity, there should also be present a contrast. We can see that just like deviation or repetition occurs at all levels of language, either it is phonological, syntactical, or morphological. And it is very frequently used as a rhetorical device. Why a rhetorical device? Because the function of rhetorical device is to make an idea striking. So writers use parallelism as a rhetorical device. In rhetoric, usually the stress is on making the reader or the listener understand and to make him really comply or correspond or even believe in what is being said. So if in Porphyria's Lover the speaker said that she felt no pain she felt, he is trying to make the reader or the listener or the implied listener in that dramatic monologue realize that he is trying to convince the listener of the same point of view which the speaker carries. So that is how parallelism functions as a rhetorical device too. In both literary and non-literary language, we see abundant use of rhetorical devices that function as parallelism, and in common they are there even in everyday speech, like proverbs, jokes or slogans, and even the jingles of certain songs or advertisements too. So one thing that parallelism presents to us is that it contains the element of identity and repetition, but the mere repetition would turn boring or trivial if it is not accompanied by some sort of a contrast. That contrast also has to have a balance, the way we notice the balance in sound and sight. Observe this example by Heller Belloc that is taken from his work on his books. It's a line taken from his poem. He says, "When I am dead, I hope it may be said, his sins were scarlet, his books were red." Observe the resemblance between these three words that are there in the red color: dead, said, and red. While reading this line aloud, we feel that there is a certain sort of repetition of the d sound that occurs at the end of both the lines. When I am dead, I hope it may be said, his sins were scarlet, his books were red. Now in the second line, the sibilance on the words sins and scarlet creates a hissing sound that also creates repetition or rhythm, that is the internal rhyme. Sins, scarlet are rhyming internally, and there is a sort of alliteration on the very beginning of both the words. Dead and red and said rhyme together, but just noticing the sound patterning that is similar is not our full analysis of deviation, which would be deviation in terms of the structure of a poem that is done through parallelism. The writer does not follow the way the ordinary speech would govern or operate. Rather, he chose to repeat certain words and put them in a particular place where they are creating a balance or an order. In this epigram, we see no violation of linguistic rules, and our attention is focused upon phonological equivalence or resemblance, which would normally be unobserved. For example, phonological resemblance is found in the word red and red. Observe that here it is written with R-E-A-D. That is the process of reading. When he talks about sense, he also may have mentioned the word red, that is R-E-D, red, the color of blood. Now, the pun upon the word red, as it could be taken as R-E-D, red, the red color of blood. His sins were scarlet, his books were red. So look, what significant notion or other dimension of meaning of these lines this alteration or pun upon the word red conveys. This might go unobserved by a layman or a novice, but we as the learners or the people studying stylistics cannot ignore such details, because parallelism has contrast also within it apart from mere identity, because identifying similarity is not so difficult a thing. You can quite easily highlight the similarity of sounds, words, structures and phonological resemblances in lines, words and statements. But a writer's plan while using parallelism is that he also makes use of contrast within it. Here the contrast is found upon the word pun, that is found on the word red. Either it is red, the color, or red as the verb, reading of books. So in this epigram, we have seen how tricky parallelism can become if it also embodies the element of contrast within it. The word red is rhyming with the word said and dead, but it is not a single meaning that we can assign to the word red. When we match it with scarlet, that is the red color, we feel that it also matches with the end of the first section of the second line, that is scarlet. So his sins were scarlet, that is red, and his books were also scarlet, that is red, the color. Or maybe the books are also read by people. So there is irony, there is pun, there is, you can say, a sort of duality of meaning conveyed so subtly, so simply by the author that he has covered it in the similar repetitive structure that is created through the use of parallelism. But the word red, that is matching with this word scarlet in meaning and is matching with the process of reading in appearance, creates the trouble, or that is the focal point that makes the reader focus his attention, and how this parallel structure foregrounds the feature red, which may be taken as pun upon the word red, that is scarlet color red, or the process of reading too. So this is how parallelism functions, to bring to the focus those ideas which on the surface might appear simple, easy and not so deep. But the presence of contrast, that is also a necessary notion within the use of parallelism, points out to the very fact that even parallelism can create deviation in an odd, unusual and a deviant way. So it may not just be a simple appearance or surface reality that is made to appear similar, that is made to sound similar, and that is made to fit into the same balanced structure. Within that balance of structure, within that similarity and repetition of pattern, we find the notion of contrast too, that would be creating irony, pun, contradiction, paradox, or revealing the absurdity of the situation, which the writer wants to foreground for the reader. And this is how foregrounding is achieved with the help of parallelism. Now let us start by looking at the functions of parallelism with respect to the very fact that parallelism is a device of regularity. It's a device used by the writers, especially the poets, to create similarity, regularity, rhythm, patterning and order in the poems. Parallelism is a type of foregrounding which is in a sense opposite of deviation. Now, how is it opposite of deviation? Critics like Jeffrey Leach say that foregrounding can be achieved either through deviation or parallelism. Deviation is breaking rule, parallelism is making rule. So when we say that it is sticking to the rule too religiously, that we adhere to the rules and follow them too rigidly in parallelism, whereas in deviation we break rules, we overlook the rules. So in that broader sense, Jeffrey Leach considers that parallelism is the opposite of deviation, because in deviation a variety of you can say selections for language use are available for the writer, but he does not choose from that available or in practice vocabulary or variety, but he makes a choice out of the available resources by making it appear strange, as it was in A Grief Ago, that had he used parallelism or similarity, he would have used the structure that is a year ago. But when he used A Grief Ago, he deviates from the norm, from the available resources of language. Whereas in parallelism, the writer would stick to the rule too extensively, too rigidly, that he would make the reader feel that it has been done deliberately and would not have been allowed in the everyday speech or ordinary language or writing. So in foregrounding, we see that the writers introduce or the poets introduce extra regularity, and these regularities are what? Lend charm to the reading, to the writing, in a way that they make it memorable, they make it quite easy to, you can say, read, understand, or even analyze. We see that any language consists in obeying rules. When you write, either you are writing for literature or you're writing something that is your ordinary maybe page of a diary or a letter to some person, or you are answering an assignment or a question in your exam, you find that you stick to the rules. For example, the teacher might have given you an idea that if you are to compose a narrative essay, what particular forms of tense you are supposed to use. So if you are writing something about your plans of the future, you might be given particular rules and details of which particular tense and verb form to stick to. So in any form of writing, you observe rules so that you compose a correct, orderly composition. But when comes the notion of parallelism, we see that the following of the rules is followed too rigidly, too extensively, and too regularly. This idea is referred to by Jeffrey Leach as ruledness. He says that to an extent, every language consists of following rules, obeying rules, and following the regularity of the structures of the language and grammar. And this idea in literature, when it becomes parallelism, is referred to as ruledness. And it's a property of language in general, both inside literature and outside literature, both inside poetry and outside poetry. So ruledness as adherence to rules, sticking to rules or orders too rigidly, too extensively, and too minutely, is the quality of parallelism found in poetry. One of the ways in which language shows itself to be reducible to rules is in the possibility of segmenting it or forming it into sections. When you segment a text into sections and parts, you have more room or chance to experiment with it and make it sound parallel. For example, look at that proverb again, out of sight, out of mind. Now the word out of, repeated in the second sentence as well, and sight and mind, they are, single syllabic words. You cannot split them into two. So this structural equivalence, this segmenting on the basis of similarity makes us understand that for the sake of creating parallelism and memorability and to make the text equivalent, you have to choose or select such words or items of structure which are balanced, which are either similar sounding or which are of the same root as well. Now you see that in any text, either a writer may choose to create parallelism through phonology, that is sounds, just the way we have seen in the words out of sight and out of mind, or where wealth accumulates and men decay, and also in his sins were scarlet, his books were red. There too you found similarity of sounds and assonance, consonance, or sibilance or alliteration in the sounds. So it can either be phonological, it can be even grammatical. Grammatical, that the same tense may be used, the same structure of the verb may be used. So a text can be analyzed as a pattern on all the levels of language. Grammatical level, phonological level, rhythmic level, syntactical level, morphological level. So all these are the levels of patterning which operate within a language and which operate in the composition of poems. So you see that layers of repeated similar structures are used by the authors in poetry. Analyze this line from Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner. That is a very celebrated example of the use of alliteration that is often quoted. That is, the furrow followed free. These lines occur in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner as the fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free. Now observe these three lines that I have read for you. The fair breeze blew. In this line, breeze blew. There is alliteration on the word breeze and blew, that is the sound b. Repetition of the sound b is creating alliteration. Fair breeze blew. Then the white foam flew. In the second line, the structure is repeated by equating the foam in place of breeze. The breeze blew and the foam flew. So first sound as well as the use of the indefinite tense, blew and flew. You can notice that here the writer has created a sort of a patterning in the sounds as well, where breeze blew and foam flew. They create similarity at the level of sound or phonology, even at the level of the verb form as well. Then the third line that I have chosen for you to elaborate how at different levels of structure you will notice the repetition, that is syllabic structure, rhythmic structure, and alliterative pattern. The furrow followed free. In this line by Coleridge from his poem Ancient Mariner, we notice the repetition of the fur sound, that is the alliteration of the sound fur on the second, third and fourth word of the line. Furrow followed free. Now the syllabic structure is also the same. Look at the syllabic structure of the whole line, that is the consonant vowel in the first word the, then furrow, consonant vowel, then followed, consonant vowel, and then free. You can see consonant, and the vowel sound repetition. In the rhythmic structure, you see there is stress on the first sound, that is furrow, followed, free. When you read this line, you put stress on fur sound. Similarly, there is alliteration on the same initial sound fur. So in these three levels, we see that there is repetition operating not just at the level of sound or syllable or rhythm, but also on all these levels that are phonological level, syllabic level, rhythmic level, and alliterative level. So these are the levels at which repetition occurs. Just the way we observed the first two lines, and I said that those lines which say the fair breeze blew, the white foam flew. So blew and flew as past forms of the verb are also corresponding. So there is, you can say, correspondence, or there is similarity or repetition even at the level of the verb form or the tense form. So all these levels, grammatical level, that is of tense, syllabic level, that is of syllables or parts of the word, stress level, that is the way it will be uttered, pronounced, and then at the level of the sound, where it would be repetitive or alliterative, that rhythmic composition lays stress on all these levels while you read this line. So that is simply what parallelism achieves, and even that also lets us know how parallelism operates, and how writers deliberately make an effort to create parallelism which has to correspond at various levels, not just the level of sound but structure, verb, tense, grammar, rhythm, syllables, and alliteration as well. So this example explains to us that meter and alliteration are not the only levels or ways through which a writer may make use of parallel structure. And in linguistic foregrounding, we can see that writers choose to obey the rules of language in order to break those conventions which are formally followed in the regular speech and everyday speech. Another example of syntactic level of foregrounding and parallelism can be seen in this line by Goldsmith, that is from his poem Deserted Village. Goldsmith in his poem Deserted Village quotes this line, or mentions this line, that says, "Where wealth accumulates and men decay." Now observe how this example shows the use of syntactic parallelism. Syntactic, that relates to the syntax or the order of words or placement of words in a sentence. Last example, furrow followed free, dealt at the level of sound when we were studying parallelism. So observe that we are looking at various levels, how parallelism operates, functions, or touches the reader, or how it is created by the writer to convey which particular ideas or messages to the reader. The furrow followed freed was an example of parallelism of rhythm or alliterative pattern. This example, we will focus at how it is creating similarity or parallelism at the level of syntax. Now, this example, that is, where wealth accumulates and men decay. If you look at the phonological level, you see repetition of the words where and wealth start with the same sound. And in this line, you see identical syntactical structure. For example, segment it into two, divide it into two, because one of the conditions that we are told about parallelism by Jeffrey Leach is that it deals with segmenting the text. Segmenting the text, dividing the text or a writing or a piece or a line into equal proportions. Now, if you segment this line or check how it has been segmented by the poet, see it is where wealth accumulates. That is the first segment or the part. And then the second part is created at the same way, at the same level, where wealth accumulates and men decay. Where, in place of where, the writer has created and to connect the two sections or the segments. At the place of wealth, he has put men. At the place of accumulates, he has put the word decay. Now, this is how at the level of segment or at the level of the words, their number and their balance, he has created parallelism or similarity. There is no extra word, there is no irregular word that is destroying the balance of the statement. Where and wealth, men, accumulates, decay. They are balanced, they are segmented, they are created as equivalents. Each consists of a single word subject followed by a single word predicate. Wealth accumulates, men decay. Now single word, wealth and men. It is not that where wise men decay. Had it been wise men decay, it would have destroyed the balance. Then the single word predicate wouldn't have been used over there. So the language allows a writer a choice from a variety of sources, from a variety of available structures. But the poet insists on sticking to the exact repetition of the same order that he used in the first part of the statement, where wealth accumulates. And he says, and men decay. This balancing would have been disturbed had it been where wealth accumulates and wise men decay. He removed it by making it correspond with wealth, which was a single word. The term parallelism, as you can see through this example, is above all associated with syntactical repetition too. It is not just merely the repetition of sounds, but also syntactical at the level of structure too. The structural similarity, the structural balance has been deliberately created in order to give a sense of, you can say, directness, immediacy, and even comprehension is what it eases for the reader. So when we read this line, where wealth accumulates and men decay, we notice similarity in syntactical structure, even in the sounds, even in the verbs and the grammatical composition of the statement or the line. But as I said earlier, that parallelism also embodies within it the element of contrast. And the element of contrast in parallelism is the most striking or the most attractive feature. Because had parallelism been operating merely at the level of sound patterning or repetition, it would have become too trivial or superficial. But when we say that parallelism operates even at the level of meaning, at it as it you can say sort of perplexes the reader's mind by creating the contrast. You know how this line, by the creation of the contrast between wealth and men, accumulate and decay functions. Wealth is something that is sort of inanimate object. It's not living thing, but wealth is where men are put. So wealth and men are put side by side. Wealth is increasing and men are decaying is the notion that is quite striking, unusual for the reader, because the writer wants to convey this sense that the progress and civilization and the materialism is leading to decay of men. Men decaying does not refer to the kind of decrease in number, but decay of the morals, decay of the values. So accumulation of wealth is contrasted with something that is deterioration, decay, and lessening of not a thing but human. That is how the contrast brings to focus the idea of the poet. That is its most significant feature, which he wants to foreground, that humanity is losing its morals due to the accumulation of wealth. Something is increasing, and then side by side some other thing is decreasing. Wealth is accumulating and men are decaying. That notion has been foregrounded with the help of parallel structure, that is syntactically parallel, that has got contrast in it in the form of wealth and men. And then there is contrast upon the words accumulate and decay. Both are opposites. Accumulation refers to rise and increase, decay refers to decrease and diminishing. So this is how parallelism is associated with syntactical patterning, syntactical repetition, or syntactical equivalence or balance. And within that equivalence and balance, we have seen that an element of contrast is also found. That highlights the very feature which the writer wishes to foreground through parallelism or repetition of structure, syntax, and sounds. As we are putting the notion of parallelism in contrast or as opposite to deviation, where we see that in a grief ago we find a deviation, rule breaking, whereas in the case of parallelism we see rule making or rule following. So in the later case, where a certain range of selections of words, vocabulary, structures and syntaxes is available to the reader, with parallelism, where the language allows a writer a broad range of choices of grammar, syntax and vocabulary, he consistently limits himself to the same option. So the writer deliberately confines himself, or you can say he limits himself to the repetition of structures and balance of structure by creating equivalence and balance, by not violating the rules or by not making it deviant. So the two elements that we feel that the notion of parallelism encompasses within it are the element of identity, similarity, order, balance that might be found at the surface level or at the level of sound or even at the level of grammar. It is accompanied with the notion of contrast too, the contrast in meaning, the contrast in the, you can say, the idea. For example, accumulate and decay. There is a contrast embedded in that line. So parallelism apparently looks identical, similar and same and is repetitive, but that repetitive pattern has also got the element of contrast, change, or even pun or contradiction or irony too. Let us observe a few more examples, that is to know how much regularity is expected, how much regularity is found or created by the writers with the use of parallelism that would be a feature to foreground certain parts of text. Observe this example, that is from Shakespeare's play Othello. Shakespeare in his play Othello makes use of this statement that is uttered by Othello himself after he killed his wife Desdemona due to suspicion. He loved the wife so much, that is the reason that he, out of suspicion, killed her. So, giving expression to that idea that it was his love for the wife, that he could not, bear that she was sort of insincere to him. That is why he loved her so much that he killed her. Is expressed through this verbal repetition or contrast too. He says, I kissed thee or I killed thee. At the level of sound, at the level of structure, we find similarity in this statement. I kissed is repeated. I kissed thee, I killed thee. Now the word kissed and killed, these are two different words, whereas the rest of the structure is the same, joined by the word er. So, killing as a verb and kissing as a verb, both have been contrasted as well as made to appear parallel with the help of the similarity of sound as well as with the help of the similarity of the verb form used. So the two clauses have identical structure, that is subject, verb, object. Subject followed by the verb killed and the object thee. I subject, kissed and killed verb, the object. So we find the same subject verb object structure followed in both these segments or equivalent parts of this statement by Shakespeare. I kissed thee, I killed thee. Then we see exact verbal correspondence between I and thee. Apart from that, there are corresponding past tenses or suffixes, ed, added to kill and kiss. Then there is a phonological congruence or resemblance between the word kissed and killed. They start with the same sound. Now this regularity becomes focal point. When you read the lines of the play, you stop at this point and notice it as a foregrounded figure, as a foregrounded feature or regularity, But within that regularity, see the contrast as well. That is the second part. Whenever you locate parallelism as a regularity or repetition of similarity of sounds, balance of structures, syntactical patterning, or grammatical equivalence, after that equivalence, which you have located in a parallel structure, observe what features within that parallel structure are contrasting. In it, you can see contrast between kissed and killed as verbs or as actions. Kissing representing the idea of love, killing representing the idea of hate, kissing representing the idea of life, that is a life-giving action, love, whereas killing, a life-ending action, hatred. So here the correspondence at the level of appearance, which was similarity, order, balance, exactness, sameness in structure, sound, and grammatical, syntactical level, has been heightened with the use of contrast of the action, the verb kissed and killed. So this is the impact of parallelism. This is the function of parallelism. As far as interpretation of parallelism is concerned, you must not just be drawn towards the similarities only. When you locate parallelism in any piece of writing, a poem or any text, after observing the similarity of structure either at the sound, at the level of sound, or at the level of grammar, syntax, and also at the level of its, you can say, grammar, the further step is to go deeper at the level of meaning and see how the verbs and certain other words are creating a contrast or giving an opposite meaning or idea or sense that might not be evident from your reading, because you might be tempted by the similarity or balance of the structure. You might overlook it as a rhythmic composition which would be easy to read and it would sound even pleasant to the ear too. But overlooking it would really make you lose the foregrounded feature, that is the contrast embedded in the statement of parallelism. Just the way we observed the last example, which was where wealth accumulates and men decay, there resided only just the identity of the clause structures, that was subject and verb. But in fact, in the elements, each element of the clause, that consisted only of a single word. And if it is the statement where wealth accumulates and men decay, which is turned into good men, then we notice that the balance is disrupted. Similarly, Shakespeare also in I kissed thee or I killed thee does not make use of any additional word which would destroy the balance or make it considerably weaker in its expression and impact. So because there would be no longer such close grammatical correspondence. So the grammatical correspondence between where wealth accumulates and men decay, I kissed thee or I killed thee, it is creating rhythmic patterning and the grammatical patterning and balance too, which would make the reader focus on these lines, and these lines would also become memorable. And then the memorability would make us feel that how the words operate to convey a meaning that is of a contrast. In both these statements, we find that contrast between the increase in wealth and decrease in morals of men. Similarly, the contrast between loving a person, that is giving him life, and hating a person and taking his life. So these two contrasts are the very theme embedded in the statements, which are foregrounded features created through regularity or parallelism by the author. So see how these examples that we observed today gave us some idea of what factors contribute to the assessment, analysis, and interpretation of the foregrounded feature of parallelism, and how strong parallelism can be in conveying meaning, and a novice might be tempted by its superficial simplicity and would take it just as a device of memorability and rhyme and rhythm making order used by the poet. But you, as the students and learners of stylistics, have come to realize that within that similar patterning and structure resides also the idea of contrast, which brings to focus the theme or the message of the poet, and it is what is really foregrounding in a text. So whether it extends to both lexical level, grammatical level, whether it operates simultaneously on the different layers of structure like syntax and verb form and grammar, or semantics too, it involves patterning on both phonological level and sound level, or formal level as well. Formal level would be the level of its form, composition. So parallelism is not just the composition or the surface appearance that creates regularity, rhyme, rhythm, order, balance, identity, which is found in songs and poems. But through parallelism, the writers also bring closer some antithetical ideas, some contrasting ideas or paradoxical ideas. So this is what we have examined about parallelism, that it might appear a little baffling because on its surface, on its appearance, parallel structures usually tend to tempt the reader that it is simple, and they might overlook that what is found within that simple structure, that what complication, what contradiction or antithetical or paradoxical view or ironical comment is found behind the apparently similar, identical, balanced sentences, segments and sections. So, as a student of stylistics or as the learner of the interpretation and the skills of interpretation of literature, we look at deviations, parallelism as foregrounded features. And when we say that parallelism is exactly the opposite of deviation, what we mean to say is that deviation is always breaking the rules, whereas parallelism is mostly making the rules. When deviation operates at the level of meaning or semantic level, parallelism begins from the level of sound, simple patterning and repetition. But you cannot ignore that this simple patterning of sound and similarity, order, may lead you also towards the understanding of an idea that is of a contrast, that is of a sort of contradiction, paradoxical or even ironical too. So this is how we see that through the examples from certain chunks of poems from the classical writers and poets, as well as we observed a few slogans or proverbs, to see how parallelism is a common device used by the writers to add to memorability of a text and their piece of writing, and to really confuse the reader, that the reader might be sort of tempted that the simplicity of the structure is to be overlooked and is just a device that the writer has used to enhance the beauty and the appearance of the form of the poem. But it is not just a formal device that makes a piece of writing or a literary writing sound or appear different in form only. The difference of form and sound is embedded in the simplicity and repetition of the structure, balance of the structure, whereas within that balance can also be found contrast, irony and contradiction, which is one of the features which parallelism leads to, or which the study of parallelism and its interpretation leads us to. So today we observed in detail another notion that is associated with the theory of foregrounding, that we see parallelism as a foregrounded regularity, whereas we looked at deviation as foregrounded irregularity. So in parallelism as foregrounded regularity, we observed how much regularity is created in poems and how the regularity is created. What are the various levels at which the writers create regularity, equivalence and repetition? We observed that it is found at various levels like phonological level, grammatical level, syntactical level, morphological level, and also lexical and syllabic level. So these are various levels which create correspondence, equivalence and balance within the text or its appearance. And after we are able to locate the similarity of structures or balance of structure in the form of grammatical, syntactical or syllabic equivalence, the next step as a stylistician or the practitioner of stylistics we lead ourselves to is that of finding whether there is found any contrast, any contradiction, any surprise within that balanced structure, the way we found in the form of the words contrasting with each other, accumulate and decay, and also kissed and killed. So that is our initial discussion of the nature, function and purpose of the technique and device of parallelism. That is one of the ways writers make use of foregrounding in a text. In our next lecture, we will move to understand the features of parallelism in more detail, and we'll look with a few examples how parallelism is created, what are the significant features that are found within parallelism. Thank you.